Good morning, everybody. My name is Lorna O'Brien, and on behalf of the O'Brien Recruitment team, to invite you to our webinar with Michael Bagraim. As we've mentioned, there is no precedent on how to handle the many challenges that we are facing, and I am pleased to have Michael with us today to guide us in navigating the vexed question of vaccinating. To vaccinate or not to vaccinate? That is the question. When can a business insist that their staff take the vaccine? What process must they follow? And what does the law say about all of this? As a small intro into Michael Bagraim graduated from Rhodes with a political science degree. He then went on to graduate with his LLB. He was admitted as an advocate in 1982 and as an attorney in 1986. He found his passion in labour law and has been practicing in this area for more than 4 decades, 26 years of which he has been a partner of the highly reputable firm, Bagraim and Associates. Michael has been the litigant on numerous groundbreaking legal disputes and currently advises nationwide corporations on the restructuring and management of their labour forces. Michael has been my sounding board for the last 2 decades and has guided and navigated O'Brien Recruitment through the changing recruitment and labour landscape, for which I am extremely grateful. Please join me in welcoming Michael Bagraim. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you to O'Brien Recruitment for inviting me once again. You're always at the cutting edge, so thank you very much. I appreciate that. And thank you, Dr. Kim. I know very little about the actual vaccine and the disease, so thank you. It's been enlightening for me. What I'm going to talk about, obviously, is whether, in fact, it can be made compulsory in terms of your rules as a business. We will tackle 1 or 2 other little things if we can, if we have the time. In other words, what happens if a staff member is not feeling well? Are they able to take sick leave, annual leave? Is it unpaid leave? What happens if someone wants to stay at home and work from home? Do you still pay them? What happens if they want to stay at home because they've been exposed and they can't do any work at home because you need them at the office? That sort of thing. Let's discuss it. I must just tell you a caveat right up front. First of all, I am very pro-vaccination, so everything I say is coloured with that particular belief. The other thing I want to tell you is that we haven't got any court cases. We don't have any rulings at this stage as to whether you can actually, in the workplace, make it compulsory. There's going to be court cases. It's going to take years of fighting about this. It's good for lawyers, not good for the employers, but let's understand right now that what we're talking about is the future. We really need to know right now as to how we can handle it and how do we do it. Now, I must tell you also that the Department of Employment and Labour have put out regulations. Those regulations, you could after this get this from Lorna O'Brien. I can send it through to her. There are regulations, and those regulations, to a large degree, should guide us as to how we're going to handle this exercise. The first thing we must know is that we have a constitution in South Africa. That constitution gives you a right to bodily integrity. In other words, and the president has said it in 2 of his family meetings, he said that, in fact, no one will be forced to have a vaccine. And he said it twice, and people keep throwing that up to me whenever I write or speak about this particular topic. And they say no one can be forced, which is correct. No one can be forced. The COVID-19 is not a disease that has been identified, such as many of the other diseases which are now reportable. This one isn't. It's just regulations at the moment. We don't have law on that either. So you can't force anyone. You can't hold them down and inject them. That you can't do. But what you can do is you can have a look at those regulations and then make decisions in terms of your own personal circumstances and the circumstances of the business. So let's go through it, because a lot of the businesses are now developing their own internal rules, their own internal regulations. And in fact, a lot of my clients are now making it compulsory at the workplace under certain circumstances. And that's where the rub is. What are those certain circumstances, and how do you decide what it is? So the compulsion itself can be easily explained in terms of an example. If anyone ever reads the Cape Argus, you'll see that I did today put a little column in the Cape Argus about this. But the one example is a case that I had a few weeks back, in fact, not a few, just 2 weeks back, where an individual is, and the company will remain nameless, but the individual is an international purchaser and has to travel. It's as simple as that. The job description is travel. Now, the unfortunate situation is that you can't travel to many countries unless you've been vaccinated. They won't let you in. So you've now got someone who's there in a highly paid position who has to travel, can't travel because she has not had the vaccination. She didn't explain why she didn't want to have it, but she said she's not going to have the vaccination. We then had to go through an exercise of dismissing this person because we couldn't accommodate them internally, and we certainly couldn't accommodate them for a whole lot of reasons. I won't go into it now, but we couldn't accommodate them to say, oh, like you can do your international buying over Zoom or Microsoft or however you want to do it. That wasn't going to work, and it wasn't good enough. In that case, luckily, we've been able to settle this, and we've had to pay over some money, and we've called it a day with that individual who is now gone. Now, we're going to be faced with thousands of these examples. Half an hour before this presentation, a woman phoned me and said that her elderly parents have a carer who refuses to have a vaccination, and she's not going to allow her in to care for her elderly parents. And I've said, why does the nurse aide refused to have the vaccination? She came back to me and she said, it's just a personal belief that she's got, not religious, not medical. It's a personal belief that she doesn't want to have the vaccination. And I said, in those circumstances, you can tell her that it's not going to be suitable, because in terms of your operational requirements, you remember the law of retrenchment, the operational requirements, is that you've got elderly parents. Yes, they've been vaccinated, but they don't want to be exposed to someone who's going to come in and actually be with them. It's a physical closeness. There's not going to be much 1.5 meters away when you're helping to feed someone and you're helping to clean someone. That's not going to work. And in those circumstances, I've said that they should actually go ahead and have that discussion with that nurse aide to tell her that there's no other job for her. And therefore, the job is going to come to an end. Now the debate is, do you retrench? In other words, dismiss for the operational requirements, or do you actually dismiss and at an inquiry? And of course, that's an answer that I'll only be able to give you once a court has made a decision on that. I've been recommending to people that you go through the operational requirements dismissal and actually give them a package, a retrenchment package. But of course, it depends on how long a person's been there and how obnoxious they are in terms of not giving you reasons. So when you are devising your own internal rules to make the vaccination compulsory, that itself is something that you need to go through in terms of consultation with the staff. If you're unionized, I would recommend very strongly that you summons the union to a meeting, present them with a draft set of rules and regulations with regard to the vaccination, and at the same time then start consulting with them. It's not negotiation. Negotiation means that you both have to come to some sort of final answer. This is not negotiation. This is consultation. You need to take into account what that staff member says, what the union says, maybe what, in fact, at the end of the day, the staff forum or the general staff have to say. So once you've been through that exercise, and you've been through the exercise of the consultation, we'll then make a set of rules and regulations. Now, it doesn't mean that you must make them hard and fast, because, for instance, there might be Joe Soap who has a religious objection to taking the vaccination. There are certain religious sects, cults, that's saying that we shouldn't actually have the injection, and I can understand that. We heard that also from our Chief Justice at some point about 6 months ago. We had a religious objection to taking the vaccination, and then we need to weigh it up against as a business, your operational requirements. For instance, at Bagraim's attorneys, I don't have a problem if someone doesn't want to take a vaccination because I don't see people. They're in their own office or they work from home. And we are effectively able to get most of the staff to work from home. Obviously not the tea lady, but anyone can work from home as an attorney. And in fact, most of our court cases and our arbitrations are held over Zoom anyway. So it doesn't really make all that much difference. And quite frankly, I sit in my little office, my 2x4 office, and I don't see anyone. When I want to speak to people, I've got an internal telephone and I Zoom whatever meetings I have. So in terms of vaccination, I'm not requiring that in terms of my operational requirements, but I've given you 2 examples now of why operational requirements is so important to take into account. What we have seen is that COSATU, the umbrella body of probably 50% of the trade unions in the country, has said that they accept that vaccination is a good thing. So at least we've got to start on that level. But they've also said that they will fight any case that if anyone loses their job because of vaccination, because they don't want to take the vaccination. So it's a little bit schizophrenic, but we're going to see those cases coming forward. So please make sure you do the following. 1, you consult. 2, you put into the consultation, into that mix, your operational requirements. And 3, you put into the mix the reason for the individual not taking the vaccination. Now, let's say you have an ailment of sorts. Dr. Kim will help us on this one, where a vaccination is not recommended for you as an individual. I know that when I went to go and have my vaccination, my first one, the nurse said to me, are you taking, I think it was blood thinners or something like that? And she asked me a couple of questions in order to test whether I'm a candidate for the vaccination. So there must be health reasons as to why you can say you don't want to have that particular vaccination. You have to take them into account. So you have to take the medical reasons into account for the individual, the religious reasons, bodily integrity as per the Constitution, and of course any other factor that would reasonably be raised which had caused a fear by the employee or the employee's representative. So you've got to take those factors into account in discussing it. And I know it's a tedious exercise. I have a client that's got a factory of just over 200 people, and they said they can't speak to everyone. And I'm saying, no, you don't need to speak to everyone. First of all, speak to the representative. There's a trade union there, and ask the representative to collate the names of the individuals and why. And of course, we've got the Poppier Act, where people say, listen, I've got reason to not take the vaccination, and you can't, in terms of my privacy, you can't ask me for my reasons. Well, I can. If they won't give me a reason, then I can say that I can't take it into account at all. So I have to then take into account my operational requirements as opposed to your reasons. So people have to come forward. And although, again, it's not an identifiable disease like TB, which it is. I mean, can you imagine someone coming into office and saying, listen, I've got TB, I've decided not to be compliant with my medication, but I'm here to work. Well, you're not going to let them in because TB is catchy and it's not a pleasant disease to catch. And so you need to take all those factors into account, either from the individual or their representative trade union or workplace forum or something of that nature. So it's going to be difficult. It's going to be a long road, and there are going to be fights about this. But I am recommending very strongly that you put together these guidelines after the consultation, that once you've got the guidelines, that you implement them. Don't have guidelines and then afterwards say, well, Michael, sorry, you haven't had your vaccination, you must go. Rather follow the guidelines when you've got them, because you're going to have trouble if you don't. The reality is that there are going to be people who are saying that I can don't have to have the vaccination. I can be accommodated elsewhere. Well, again, it's up to the business to try and accommodate them the best as they can. If you feel it's not going to work for someone working at home, that the productivity levels have dropped quite radically, then that's for you to decide. Again, it's not negotiation, it's consultation. You merely take into account what the individual employee has to say before you make a final decision, and you need to prove that you've taken into account what the individual has had to say. So you have a joint problem-solving exercise, and again, I'm using the wisdom and the ethic of retrenchment. It's a joint problem-solving exercise where you would take into account, make decisions, present the decisions, and explain why the decision has been made, and possibly even enter into further consultations thereafter. Now, the reality is, of course, that there are going to be fights about this. You would try and resolve it as quickly as possible. You don't want to be at the cutting edge of law, that's for sure. And at the end of the day, you would then possibly not only consult with the trade union, but the Department of Health and the Department of Employment and Labour. Now, both of them are incredibly difficult to get hold of. I've had enormous difficulty. I deal with the Department of Employment and Labour daily, and the chances of you getting a mail back from them quickly is almost impossible. But at least you would then write to the Department of Employment and Labour and explain the decision that you've taken, and that you would take those decisions in terms of the regulations that have been put out. Now, let me explain another problem that we've just had, and it's a major problem. I have a client that is a small business, and I've seen this actually been repeated a few times, but in this one it was quite a stark reality that was hit home. The staff were given some time off to go and get vaccinated, and the employer, in fact, arranged for the vaccination of the entire staff. There are only 15 of them. What happened in those circumstances is, of the 15, 13 agreed to go and get vaccinated. Now, you can't hold someone down, like I said, and say, you will go get vaccinated. After the discussions, it became evident that 2 didn't want to get vaccinated. And those 2 didn't have fantastic reasons. The one said that she had heard a rumor that I wanted to repeat the rumors, but anyway, they were bizarre. Both rumors were bizarre. And they thought, okay, well, they weren't hard and fast about it. Well, 2, that's not too bad. At least 13 get vaccinated. Well, what happened was, of course, when all 15 started working the next day, they had a delegation come to the manager who said, we're not going to work with those 2. We've all had our vaccination, and we're not going to be exposed to this illness. We have families, we have elderly parents, we have young children, etc., and we can't work with them. Now you've got an insurrection at work, because 13 have said, look, we weren't that keen. No one's that keen to have an injection, and especially when there's a lot of rumors out there. I was, as a joke, I was listening to one of the employees saying that she won't have the vaccination because she had heard that she'll hear Radio Wuhan playing in her ear afterwards. And it's as silly as that. When you've got that, then you have to tell those 2 who didn't have the vaccination, look, unfortunately, the others won't work with you. You now tell me a jolly good reason as to why. Are you ill? Have you had medical advice that you can't take the vaccination? And in those circumstances, we've had to suspend the 2, and we've had to tell them that, look, we're going to have a hearing, and we've set up a disciplinary hearing for next week for them, because from my estimation is there isn't a jolly good reason, not even a religious reason, as to why they won't have the vaccination. And that's a real problem. Now, what do you do when, and I'll quickly go on to the other thing, I don't have all that much time, but what do you do when, for instance, a staff member says, I've been exposed to someone who has COVID-19? Well, obviously, if that person has refused to be vaccinated, I would say very strongly, and we have been doing this, well, you refused to vaccinate. Yes, you can stay at home. You should stay at home because I don't want someone exposing the rest of my staff, but that's going to be on unpaid leave. Some of my clients have said, well, they can take the rest of your sick leave, although you're actually not sick at this point. And for you legitimately to take sick leave, you need to be able to say that I'm too ill to work, or I'm ill and might expose someone, but they're not ill, and we would wait for their test then to come out. What happens if someone who has had a vaccination says, I've been exposed to a family member who is now COVID positive? And again, I would then lean in their favor to say you can take your extended sick leave, or you can take sick leave that is owing to you, at least you get some payment. You could even then agree that they would take some leave if there is any leave owing to them. But again, that's a decision that has to be taken jointly between the employer and the employee, because we are still under the yoke of the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, and that this COVID-19 has not suspended the act. Take that into account every single time, because our minister, bless him, the Minister of Employment and Labour, has been making statements almost as if the Basic Conditions of Employment Act has been suspended. In fact, I had a very public argument with him almost a year ago where he said that if people can't work because of COVID-19, they would stay at home, and even if you can't do your work at home, you'll carry on getting your salary. That's not true. The Basic Conditions of Employment Act says you get paid for work. You don't get paid to stay at home. Unless the employer is saying that you can adequately do your work at home, that's the point about this whole exercise. So if you've been exposed to someone, that you would probably take unpaid leave. If you've been exposed to someone at work and they've then sent you home because the work has to close now, again, it's no work, no pay, unless you want to do some sort of consultation with them and say some of the work can be done at home, or if you can't do any work at home, I'm prepared to pay you a certain amount. There is obviously the UIF. You can claim UIF. The TERS monies have come to an end. And of course, the government is also now trying to put together a COVID insurance through the Department of Employment and Labour, where you'd get some money paid through the compensation fund. In other words, you are sick from the COVID, and you would then be able to put in a claim at the compensation fund if, in fact, the illness was gained at work, that you caught it from someone at work, and you could show that, and your manager is able to give you a statement saying that someone at work was positive, others have now got it, they're too sick to work, and then you could claim from the compensation fund. So there is that. So not only the UIF, but the compensation fund, a little bit more difficult to claim there, but it is being successful in certain circumstances. The reality is a lot of this is new. A lot of this is brand new ground that you have to tread. And I am very strongly recommending that whenever you can talk your way through this with a particular staff member, do that rather than have the fight. If someone feels that, and a staff member feels that they've been treated wrongly, or that the business is not following the protocols of the health regulations, and there are protocols put out by both the Department of Health and the Department of Employment and Labour, if you're not following it, they can actually report that to the CCMA, the Commission for Conciliation, Mediation and Arbitration, or to the Department of Employment and Labour and get an inspector. But we're already having cases referred to the CCMA on the basis that they are either getting ill from work or that the work is not following the protocols and they're feeling too exposed and they want to stay at home. The bottom line is, if someone is going to stay at home and it's not acceptable for them to stay at home, you don't have to pay them. You can also go through the exercise to terminate the employment relationship. So thank you very much for listening to me. I really appreciate it. Lorna, thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I can't see any questions.
Michael, there are a couple of questions. Thanks very much. Just one comment from Kim, from Dr. Fora. She just said, yes, Michael, there are clinical conditions which preclude vaccination, but they are very rare. Most people would be able to vaccinate safely. In terms of questions, one from Sarah Sonnenberg, is one able to, as a customer, require to see a vaccine certificate? For example, a waiter or a waitress potentially serving one, as an example.
No, you can't because of the POPIA Act, but you can ask, you can't insist. And the point is, and we're seeing this all around the world, that many businesses, to actually make their businesses more viable, are insisting that their staff do have the vaccination and that they then wear a positive. I know a restaurant, there was a case reported a restaurant in Italy where the staff actually had a badge saying, I've been vaccinated, and it made them more popular. The customers, the patron, was feeling more comfortable. But in South Africa, because of the POPIA Act, you can't insist to know whether your waitress is or waiter is vaccinated or not. But that was up to you as to whether you're going to give them any business. We're going to see more of that. Some of the jurisdictions around the world are actually behaving quite badly and saying that you can't come to a theater, you can't come to any place where the others are gathered if you haven't been vaccinated. And it becomes almost like a passport to get into a movie or into a restaurant. It's quite an exercise, but we're going to have problems here because our legislation, unfortunately, doesn't very carefully weigh up the rights of the individual against the rights of the group. And my default is to the rights of the group. And I think our labor law is going to default to the rights of the group in the sense that no right that anyone has is an absolute right. To give you an example, you have freedom of speech in South Africa, but that doesn't give you the freedom in a crowded cinema to shout fire. You don't have that freedom because then everyone's going to charge to the door and people will get hurt. And so those rights must be weighed up. And I think the rights of the group in terms of our labor laws are going to override the rights of the individual. And of course, it'll override if a restaurant says, no, we're not going to tell you whether our waitresses are vaccinated or not. Well, then you'll go to the one next door. You'll be voting with your feet. That's the reality of it.
Thanks. And then just to follow on that, Angela was asking, what if our customers are wanting our sales reps to be vaccinated in order for them to call on them? Can it be viewed as an operational requirement? What about future employment opportunities? Can it be used as a selection criteria?
Absolutely, and I love that. Yes, I would put it in as a selection. Once you've been through the consultation and you put together your own regulations, you would then put it in like into your disciplinary code. You can have a vaccination code. And we're busy drawing up them now for clients. And yes, if you don't want to do business with someone and that's your choice, you can say, no, our reps aren't going to be vaccinated. They don't feel like it. And then they say, well, then we'll deal with your opposition. And that is an operational requirement. Absolutely. It's not even in your control. It's in your customer's control. And the customer will say, I don't want to see someone that isn't actually vaccinated. And I want to see people. And I'm only prepared to do it in person. And as much as your own staff say, well, I can do it with them in Zoom. If the customer doesn't want a Zoom meeting, well, that's the customer calls. The customer's right. I used the example last week with a client of mine where I employ a driver. If that driver on the weekend drives drunk and he has his license suspended for 2 years, well, obviously he's not a driver anymore. I don't have any other job for him. He's not a driver anymore. I will, due to my operational requirements, dismiss him. And that's the bottom line, even though it might have been his fault this time because he got drunk. But let's say, for instance, that through no fault of his own, he loses his ability to drive. That's my operational requirement. He's going to lose his job. It's hard to say that, but there you are. We've got a business has to survive at the end of the day.
Okay, and then one from Erica. When you say consult, we assume you mean individual, so that before you have asked for everyone's vaccine status, and then you set up a one-to-one consultation.
Yeah, when I say consult, Obviously, if you have a trade union, it makes it a lot easier in these circumstances because you would present your proposals to the trade union organizers who would then speak to the shop stewards. And so you can make it a much more interactive session. If you don't have a trade union, it then becomes very difficult. If there's no workplace forum, it becomes very difficult to consult people in groups. And then you might have to actually call people in one by one. And fortunately, these discussions aren't taking all that long, because when someone says, no, I'm happy to be vaccinated, then that discussion shouldn't take more than a minute. And then you would arrange it for that staff member. And people are saying to me, do I give them time off, or do I take off their leave pay or whatever when they go vaccinate? I think we need to encourage people to be vaccinated and actually give them a day off to go get vaccinated, because it could take a morning. I know that one of the clients of mine have said that they will bus them there through their own transport and have someone waiting to take people back, so you don't waste a whole day in making appointments. But don't take it off people's leave. Let them go do it off their sick leave. That's not fair. You want to encourage people to be vaccinated. Those that don't want to be vaccinated, and it's normally the minority, are wanting to tell you a bit about why they won't. That might take 10, 15 minutes as part of the consultation, but it's not an onerous exercise.
Great, thanks. And will we be challenged as a business to make reasonable accommodation?
You will be, obviously, especially if there's a trade union involved. And as you heard from me earlier, COSATU is already threatening to challenge these exercises, but they can actually give you the input, and that's the whole idea of the consultation. When someone says, I'm not going to be vaccinated because I can sit in my own office at Bagraim's attorneys and I don't have to see anyone, that's reasonable accommodation. But if we're working, for instance, in a factory setup, and we're all at big tables and we're sitting around doing a CMT operation, I can't accommodate Josephine, who's going to sit by herself somewhere else when she's doing the buttonholes. That's not going to be acceptable. And so they can tell me as much as they want. At the end of the day, it's your business. You must make, the HR has to make that decision and say that we can accommodate so-and-so. And then, of course, you have to take into account all the people around them. And like you saw in the one example I gave earlier, where the rest of the staff themselves came forward and said, no, we are not having those two sit with us. Forget about it. So that's, again, another operational requirement.
Thanks. There's 3 or 4 more. What if employees do not want to disclose that they have been vaccinated or that they ever will? During consultation in light of the POPI Act, can we justify our requirement for information based on operational requirements?
Absolutely. And they don't have to tell you, like they don't have to have the vaccination. But then you have to make a decision on the basis of what you think. And there's nothing stopping you saying, if you can't tell me, then I have to make the assumption that you won't be vaccinated or you haven't been vaccinated. And based on that assumption, I need to protect my staff. There is law for every employer to ensure that all staff remain healthy. We have the health and safety regulations under the Department of Labour and the Department of Health. And your obligation, we're weighing up 2 obligations now. Your obligation under the Department of Health is to keep your staff healthy. The obligation under the Constitution is people have bodily integrity. Now, do you weigh it up? And again, in the labour law, it's not only law. Labour cases are decided on both law and equity. What is equitable in the situation? And again, I say the rights of the group trump the rights of the individual as long as it's fair.
And it could be construed that through the consultation process, the employer's reasoning is very subjective.
Well, of course, it's always subjective. And that, I mean, there's nothing evil about subjectivity. You're running a business. You're running O'Brien Recruitment. You, as O'Brien Recruitment, send your consultants to your clients. You want to deliver a service. You don't sit in your golden office and phone them all the time. You actually go out there and see them face to face, and you can then take proper instructions as to what is required. You don't want your consultants to say, well, I'm not telling you. And if they won't tell you, that's fine. That's their right. You're not interfering with their rights. All you're interfering with is the fact that they don't have a job at you. They'll find somewhere else. They can get a job somewhere else. That's not a problem. I suspect a year down the line in South Africa, that when you come for an interview, they're going to ask you, have you been vaccinated and have you got any objection to it? Because it's going to be taken into account in the future. Just like any other, I mean, when I interview lawyers, I want to know that they've got legal degrees and that they've been admitted as an attorney. If they say, well, because of POPIA, I'm not going to tell you whether I've been admitted. That's my personal information. I say, well, okay, I understand that and I respect it, but you're not going to work here.
And then from Gaynor, what are the employees charged with for a hearing?
Well, it's not in terms of a charge, it's a hearing, and I like to rather do it in terms of operational requirements. So I would take them into a consultation and say, due to our operational requirements, we need you to do the following. You can't do the following because you won't get vaccinated. We fully understand that, but unfortunately, we need to terminate on that basis. And then you would pay them the severance package. It's a much better way of doing it, because I don't think people are refusing to be vaccinated just to be otherwise. People normally have their own internal reasoning, even if they won't give it to you. I don't think anyone's evil that they're saying, oh, I don't want to be vaccinated because I'd like to infect everyone else over here. Well, hopefully people like that don't exist, not in South Africa anyway. I suspect that people do have all sorts of fears. I know that Dr. Kim did say that there are some people out there that have been listening to false rumors and weird fears. But look, I spoke about 3 weeks ago to a Sangoma who was advising people not to get vaccinated because it's going to be the devil. And it was impossible trying to explain that that's not true. That's his belief. And there were some people, unfortunately, that he had advised who believed that. Now, I don't think they were trying to be otherwise. That's what their belief was. And I just said, well, if that's the case, unfortunately, we can't have you at this employer. And so we went through an exercise of retrenchment. It cost a few weeks' salary to pay the person off. You don't want to have a major fight, and you want to rather settle it with both sides to sign that it's done in full and final settlement. It's a much easier way because, like I said, these haven't been tested. The CCMA has got a whole lot of them lined up to be argued in due course. None of my clients want to be part of that exercise.
Okay, great. There are one or two more questions, but we are out of time. So if it's okay, if there are any further questions, either keep them coming in on the chat or alternatively email them to me, and I'll get hold of Michael and I'll get the answers for you and get back to you. But as always, Michael, it's been fantastically informative. You always know what's going on with the current issues that actually there's no precedent on, but you seem to be right up there knowing what we need to be doing. So really appreciate your time, and thank you to everybody for joining us.
Yeah, thank you to everyone.